it's useful to talk to people that you don't agree with. And it's useful for a variety of reasons. And one is that a lot of what determines your political orientation is biological temperament, far more than people realize. So, for example, left-leaning people, liberals, let's say, although that's kind of a misnomer, but we'll keep with the terminology. Liberals are high in a trait called openness, which is one of the big 5 personality traits, and it's associated with interest in abstraction and interest in aesthetics. It's the best predictor of liberal political leaning. And they're low in trait conscientiousness, which is dutifulness and orderliness in particular. Whereas the conservatives are the opposite. They're high in conscientiousness, they're dutiful and orderly, and they're low in openness. And that makes them really good managers and administrators, and often businessmen, but not very good entrepreneurs. Because the entrepreneurs are almost all drawn from the liberal types. And so these are really fundamentally biologically predicated differences. And you might think about them as different sets of opportunities and limitations, and certainly different ways of screening the world. And each of those different temperamental types needs the other type. So economically speaking, for example, we need liberals to start businesses and we need conservatives to run them. And the conservatives are too conservative. So if they are running businesses, they have a bitch of a time with innovation. Whereas the liberals are really good at generating new ideas and moving laterally, but they're not very good at the level of detail and implementation. And so if you start understanding that this is a diversity issue, let's call this a diversity issue. If you start understanding that the person that you're talking to who doesn't share your political views isn't stupid, that's the first thing, necessarily. They might be, but so might you be. Stupidity isn't the... Differences in intelligence are not the prime determinant of differences in political belief. All right, so you might be talking to someone who's more conscientious and less creative than you if you happen to be a liberal. But that doesn't mean that that person's perspective is not valid, and it doesn't mean that they wouldn't outperform you in some domains, because they would. So one thing to remember is people actually do see the world differently. It's not merely that they're possessed of ill-informed opinions. So you have to, first of all, stretch out your hand and say, look, I get that you see the world differently than me. And I also understand that there's a place for you and a place for me, even though that isn't the same place. And then it's necessary to also remember that, well, do you want to talk to people, or do you want to fight with them? Because fighting is not pleasant, and it goes very dark places very, very rapidly. And so, the last time I was down in Boston, I talked to an old friend of mine, and this person went on a relatively solid and strong and relatively personal critique of Trump supporters, calling them ill-informed and stupid and an insulting characterization. And I thought, well, it was surprising to me because this was a reasonable person, and I think it was an indication of the polarization. But you can't throw away 50% of the population like that. It's not reasonable, and it's the same on the right. The conservatives can't do it to... liberals either. I mean, right now, I think that radical left totalitarian proclivity is a much greater danger than radical right totalitarian proclivity, especially on the university campuses. And so I've been mostly speaking out about the left-wing radicals. It could have just as easily been the reverse case. It just doesn't happen to be. But the whole point of a democracy is to continue the dialogue between people of different temperamental types, so that we don't move so far to the right that everything becomes encapsulated in stone and doesn't move, or so far to the left that everything dissolves in a kind of mealy-mouthed chaos. And the only way that you can navigate between those two shoals is through discussion, which is why free speech is such an important value. It's the thing that keeps the temperamental types from being at each other's throats. Just like in a marriage, because there's differences in a marriage. If you can't talk, you're either subservient or you fight. Well, that's just no good. So part of it is have some respect for people that are different than you, which is, of course, what the radical leftists are saying, but they don't identify the real differences.